All right, this video is to illustrate what happens to type 1 diabetics when they are in crisis. So first of all, we have a bunch of sugar that is arriving here into the bloodstream from a meal, and there's absolutely no insulin present to get the sugar into the cells. Now, of course, the cells are starving and they need to produce some ATP, and so since they can't use the glucose, they'll go ahead and use fats. So let's say there's fats in each of the cells. They can use fats, they're going to use proteins to produce their ATP. And as a result, what's going to be kicked off here from the using of the fats to produce ATP is going to be ketone bodies. And so ketone bodies are kicked off here and they're acidic. And so they will contribute an increased amount of hydrogen ions. And so we get hydrogen ions here that are going to be increased into the bloodstream. Hydrogen ions. Okay, and so there's going to be a bunch of them, and some of those are going to be able to be neutralized by bicarb. We're going to add bicarb here. So bicarb is HCO3. Okay, so bicarb is going to neutralize your hydrogen ions every time here. 1 bicarb per hydrogen ions in an effort to maintain a balanced pH. And another thing that the body can do is it can decide to hide some of these hydrogen ions inside of its cells. So it can move some of these hydrogen ions in here inside the cells. And since we got to maintain electrical neutrality, what it's going to do is going to kick off one of the potassium ions that is in here. So there's a potassium ion here, which is also positively charged, and it will just simply kick it off into the bloodstream. And so at first you're going to have an increase in potassium ions into when you see a diabetic in crisis, but then as more and more of them are kicked off and then cleared by the kidneys, then you'll see your potassium levels going to drop eventually. So in recap, what usually you see is your glucose is elevated. So we go glucose is high, very high. We have an increase in hydrogen ions, which means basically a low pH. Let me actually write that properly here. So I'm going to do a pH that is decreased, proportional to the amount of hydrogen ions, of course, that are being kicked out. And then the potassium, of course, is going to be, at first, potassium is increased, but then later on is going to be, the potassium is going to be decreased. And then, of course, the bicarb that is being used up to neutralize all these extra hydrogen ions is going to be all used up. So your bicarb tends to be really low, and this is a hallmark, of course, of metabolic acidosis. And so this picture is called Diabetic Ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis. And you'll also, because of the presence of all this glucose and all the ketones and everything that's going on, you'll tend to see also dehydration. The body tries to flush all of this out, and there'll be some dehydration and stuff. So symptoms, of course, in all the diabetics are, increased thirst and increased urination and hunger, but also headaches and aches and stuff like that. So nausea, vomiting is also very common. But so this is just a general picture of what happens to a type 1 diabetic in crisis. Very simple.